Hi there, I'm just a little cat trying to reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It's free. Just click subscribe right under this video. It would mean the world to me.
You ever get a birthday card with no money in it? Just some recycled quote about how growing up is the real gift? That was my birthday. Except this year, my mom didn't even bother with a card. She just said, "Adults don't need presents." Cool. That same afternoon, she posted 10 photos of my sister unboxing a brand new Gucci bag with the caption, "Our baby girl deserves the world." I was in the next room. I didn't even get a slice of cake, so I disappeared. No warning, no calls, no goodbye, just vanished. You want to know what they did when I was gone? They didn't search, they didn't cry, they tried to erase me. But what came next? They never saw that coming. I turned 39 on a Tuesday, which, if we're being honest, already sounds like a joke the universe wrote just for its own amusement. 39, a year that nobody celebrates, a number wedged between "you're still young" and "you should know better." But still, I woke up that morning thinking maybe, just maybe, someone would remember that I existed. I didn't expect balloons or some Hallmark movie montage of hugs and surprises and candles. But I did think someone might say something other than, "Hey, did you take the garbage out last night?" Which was the first thing my mother said to me when I walked into the kitchen. You know that sinking feeling when you realize the people around you are not just forgetting you, they've chosen not to see you? That's what that morning felt like. My mom was standing there, hair dyed the same shade of ash blonde she's had for 20 years, tapping on her phone with that distracted energy she always had around me, like even making eye contact would drain her emotionally. My stepdad, Carl, didn't even look up from his newspaper, the same local rag he only reads to check the obituaries and see who's finally made room. I stood there, in a house I didn't even want to be in, trying to pretend that it didn't sting that no one said happy birthday. Not even a grunt. Nothing. I cleared my throat, trying to give them a second chance to remember. Nothing again. So I poured myself some coffee, told myself I was overreacting, and sat down to check my phone. And there it was. The nail in the coffin, if I'm being dramatic. And I was being dramatic because, well, when you spend most of your life being quiet, sometimes you need to scream in your own way. On Instagram, my mom had posted a full carousel of photos. Emily, my younger sister, standing in front of some boutique downtown, holding up a designer handbag like she'd just won Miss America. Her fake laugh face was on full display. Her nails freshly done in that pale pink shade she always said made her look clean and expensive. And right there in the caption was the line that made my stomach twist into a knot, so tight I thought I might physically throw up. Our sweet girl deserves the very best. Surprise gift day. No mention of me. Not a birthday post, not a tag, not a text. My mother had woken up, bought Emily a handbag that probably cost more than my car payment, driven her downtown, staged a photo shoot, posted it, and captioned it like she was auditioning for America's Next Top Instagram Mom. And I was just there, in the house, unmentioned, unseen, uninvited to the damn narrative. I stared at that post for a long time, coffee getting cold in my hand, watching as the comments rolled in. OMG, so sweet. What a lucky daughter. Linda, you're such a thoughtful mama. Each one felt like a slap, like I was being erased publicly in real time. And the worst part? It wasn't new. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was just the first time I couldn't ignore it anymore. Growing up, Emily was always the one with the shiny things. The new backpack, the bigger room, the louder praise at Christmas when she handed over her glittery, overpriced presents. I was the quiet one, the low-maintenance one, the one who didn't need much and was so independent. I was always the one they didn't have to worry about. But being forgotten isn't a compliment. It's not a virtue. It's a slow death. So I stood up, walked into my room, packed a small duffel bag. Nothing dramatic, just the essentials. I didn't even take my phone charger. I wasn't planning some wild exit or cry for attention. I was just done. Tired of being the one in the shadows while they polished Emily's halo. I left a note. It was short. Just one sentence. Sometimes disappearing is the only way to be seen. I knew they'd find it eventually. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd assume I was sulking in my room or out buying milk. Maybe it would take them a day or two to realize I was gone. I didn't care. I needed them to sit with that silence. When I stepped outside, the air felt different. It was that weird early spring chill, the kind that makes you squint against the sun even though it's cold. I walked down the driveway, past the trash cans, past Carl's old truck, past the potted plant my mom had killed and kept watering anyway, like that would bring it back to life. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay. Later that evening, while sitting on a stiff motel bed with a vending machine dinner, I checked my mom's Instagram again. Don't judge, curiosity is a curse, and saw that she'd posted another story. This time, it was a boomerang of her and Emily clinking wine glasses. Caption: celebrating good news. No idea what the good news was, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that my absence had gone unnoticed. Or worse, unbothered. That's when something inside me snapped. Not in a violent way, but in that cold, quiet way. You know something permanent just shifted. That moment when your heart stops begging and starts planning. And that's when the idea came to me. Not revenge in the movie sense, not fire and police reports and screaming matches. No, I wanted the kind of revenge that feels like a question mark burned into someone's conscience. I wanted to become the silence they couldn't ignore anymore. So I made a plan. Not all at once, but piece by piece, as the hours passed and the calls never came. And as the sky turned black and their glasses clinked under fairy lights, I disappeared just a little more, with every step, every post they made, everything they didn't say. And trust me, they would regret it, just not in the way they expected. Because I wasn't just gone, I was about to make being forgotten unforgettable. People like to think that being the quiet one means you're peaceful, that silence is a sign of inner strength or the wisdom. But the truth is, most of the time, it's just survival. A way of not making things worse, of keeping the temperature in the room stable because you've already figured out that if you raise your voice, no one's going to listen anyway. And if they do, they'll only twist your words and throw them back at you until you start to believe you were wrong for speaking in the first place. I remember when it started, the disappearing act that didn't involve suitcases or motel beds or unanswered calls, but the slow, careful erasure of who I was, the casual redirection of attention, the tiny thefts of affection and priority that started in childhood and never really stopped, only got more subtle, more socially acceptable. I remember when Emily broke my Walkman in middle school because she said it was too old and she wanted to take it apart for a project. And when I cried about it, my mom laughed and told me to let it go. It was just a cheap little thing, even though it was the first thing I ever bought with my babysitting money. I remember when Emily got caught cheating on a high school test, and my mom marched into the school like a damn lawyer, waving her arms and demanding they erase it from her record, claiming stress and bullying and how the teacher had it out for her. While I got a C on an essay once and was told, maybe you're just not applying yourself. That was the rhythm of it. One golden child, one shadow. Emily always got to be complicated, emotional, impulsive, special, while I was expected to be steady, simple, the one who didn't need defending, the one who could handle being ignored. And for years, I convinced myself that maybe that was love too, in its own way. Maybe being forgotten meant they trusted me. Maybe silence meant approval. But no matter how I tried to dress it up, it never felt like love. It felt like being tolerated, like background noise. After I left that night, after the Instagram post, the wine toast, the final brittle straw that snapped beneath years of tiptoeing around their narcissism, I checked into a place off the highway, one of those low-rent lodges with thin walls and sad art on the walls, the kind where the vending machines hum louder than the tea I paid in cash. No calls, no GPS, nothing traceable. And it surprised me how easy it was to disappear, to vanish like I'd never been there to begin with. Because the truth is, when you've spent your whole life being invisible, going off-grid isn't a stretch. It's just finally acting the part you've been assigned since birth. I deleted my main social accounts, not permanently, but enough to make it look like something was off. I didn't answer texts, though there weren't many. I turned off my phone after screenshotting my mom's post and saving it into a folder labeled receipts. Because I wasn't planning to stay gone forever, not physically. Emotionally, yes. Spiritually, I was out the damn door. But physically, this was just phase 1. The ghosting, the removal. The quiet before the storm. 3 days passed before anyone called. 3. I don't know what's worse. The fact that I wasn't worth a check-in, or that when the call finally came, it wasn't to ask if I was okay. It was from Carl. Bland, passive Carl, who probably didn't even notice I hadn't been at dinner. He didn't say, "We're worried." He didn't ask, "Where are you?" He just said, "Hey, your mom's upset. She said you left some cryptic note. Are you trying to start drama?" Drama. That word hit like ice water down the back. Drama. Not pain, not confusion, not "we miss you," just more emotional accounting. As if my disappearance was some attention stunt, a selfish inconvenience disrupting their curated image. I didn't answer. I let him talk to my voicemail. I let his tone fill the silence like an accusation, not a concern. That was when I realized. They weren't scared for me. They were embarrassed. Embarrassed I might go public. Embarrassed I might tell the truth. And that right there became the second push, because I'd already decided to disappear. But now I was going to haunt them. By day 5, I had moved locations. Another small motel, different town, cash only. I borrowed an old laptop from a woman I met in the laundromat downstairs. A kind old widow named Myra, who thought I was escaping an abusive relationship. I didn't correct her. It wasn't far from the truth. Emotional abuse doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves ghosts, and I was full of them. With that laptop, I started creating what I called my mirror, a digital archive of every slight, every memory, every moment they gaslit me into thinking I was overreacting. Photos, screenshots, texts, diary entries, emails. I was crafting a picture. Not for them, but for me. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined the neglect, that being hurt without being hit still counts as real pain. And part of me, the petty part, the broken child still sitting at that forgotten birthday table, wanted to use it, wanted to publish it, send it to their friends, their coworkers, their perfect little suburban social circle. But I didn't, not yet, because I knew something they didn't. I knew how to be patient. They had spent a lifetime underestimating me, assuming I'd always come back, always apologize, always downplay my hurt for the sake of peace. But not this time. This time I was going to let them sweat, let them wonder, let them panic. I didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. I just needed to be gone. And slowly the silence started to speak louder than any argument I'd ever had. That's when I noticed something strange. My mom, ever the social media maven, hadn't posted in 2 days. Her stories stopped. Her perfect breakfast and garden shots and wine nights vanished. And then suddenly, on day 7, she posted a black square. No caption, just a square. As if she'd died, or someone had. The comments started pouring in, sending love, thinking of you, hope everything's okay. But it wasn't grief she wanted. It was attention. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post, but I watched. I watched as the house of cards started to tremble, as people began to ask questions. Where's Nora? Didn't she just have a birthday? Is she okay? And the best part? I wasn't hiding out in some cave, cut off from the world. I was watching everything unfold. From the quiet, for the first time in my life, I was the loudest one in the room. It's a strange thing, watching your own disappearance unfold from a distance, like sitting in the back row of a theater where the movie just so happens to be your life. Except in this version, you're not the protagonist or the hero or even the misunderstood anti-hero. You're the missing girl whose name becomes a whisper in someone else's performance, a puzzle piece everyone pretends to care about only because they're terrified it might make them look bad if they don't. By the end of the second week, the search wasn't about me at all, not really, but about optics, about damage control, about how to spin the silence into sympathy before people started connecting dots they weren't supposed to see. It wasn't about Nora, the 39-year-old daughter who had gone silent after being ignored on her own birthday. It was about Nora, the name being dropped at book clubs, in work break rooms, and in group texts that started with, "Did you see Linda's post?" followed by screenshots and over-punctuated worry that tasted more like gossip than genuine concern. The moment it started to shift, the exact moment I knew they were feeling the heat, was when Emily, my younger sister and longtime family favorite, posted a memory from 2 years ago on Facebook. It was a photo of the two of us standing in front of a birthday cake, me smiling politely while she leaned into the camera like she was the one blowing out the candles. The caption read, "Missing this one today. Hope you're okay, sis." Just vague enough to seem tender, just calculated enough to serve as a kind of digital alibi for the people who might start asking where I was and why nobody in my own family had said anything sooner. It wasn't about checking on me. It was a preemptive strike, a way of controlling the narrative before it spiraled out of their grip. I didn't comment, I didn't like it, but I watched. I watched as the replies rolled in, all drenched in performative concern and casual judgment. "Hope everything's all right. We're here for you. Let us know if we can help." The kind of phrases that people type from the safety of suburban living rooms, sipping wine they didn't pay for, while the television plays in the background and their own children scroll on phones 5 feet away, emotionally unavailable in their own quiet ways. And while I watched, I realized something else too. Nobody was really looking for me. There had been no police report, at least not that I could find. No flyer, no public appeal, not even a missing person post with my photo and a phone number. They didn't treat me like someone who had vanished. They treated me like someone throwing a tantrum, like a moody teenager who needed time to cool off before she came crawling back home, shame-faced and apologetic, ready to take her seat again at the family table where the main dish was always denial and the dessert was served with a side of emotional manipulation. But this time, they'd miscalculated. Because I wasn't just gone, I was in control. From the rented room in a second-rate extended-stay motel that smelled like cheap lemon cleaner and regret, I watched everything from the burner laptop Myra had lent me, logging into accounts they didn't know existed, reading public posts and private forums, tracking their every attempt to reframe the story into something they could live with. But the truth was leaking through the cracks, in the way people started asking quiet questions in comment sections and group chats, in how some old friends reached out to mutuals saying, "Is Nora okay? I haven't seen her in a while." And in the way those same mutuals were met with silence or vague platitudes when they reached out to my mother. The pressure was building. And then something unexpected happened. An email arrived, not to my personal account. They didn't have access to that anymore, but to an old shared inbox I used to manage for a community blog project years ago. Something my mom had helped me run when I was still naive enough to believe that bonding over recipes and book reviews could heal a strained mother-daughter dynamic. The email was from my mother, sent at 3 a.m, the subject line simply reading, "If you're out there." The body of the email was short, surprisingly raw in tone, though still riddled with the kind of blame-drenched tenderness she specialized in. That passive-aggressive tone disguised as love. She wrote that she was worried, though there was no acknowledgement of what she was worried about. No mention of the birthday, or the bag, or the post that started it all. Instead, she wrote, "I just don't understand why you would do this to us." As if my quiet, my absence, was an act of violence rather than the result of 100 smaller wounds she refused to see. "Emily is really struggling," she added, which felt like a sick joke, considering Emily had been out clubbing just 3 nights ago, tagging locations and people in a way that didn't exactly scream emotional turmoil. But the last line of the email is what caught me. It didn't sound like her. It was too direct, too unsettling, almost like someone else had written it, and she'd just copied it in a moment of desperation. It said, "We know about the storage unit. You didn't hide it well." That stopped me cold. Because I had, in fact, rented a small storage unit a few towns over 1 month before my birthday, in a town I had no connection to, under a name pulled from a spam email. I used it to keep some documents, a few photos, and yes, backup drives. Things I didn't want to lose if I ever truly left. Things that mattered enough to save, but not enough to take. And nobody should have known. Nobody. Unless someone had followed me. Unless they had already started trying to trace my steps before the silence became too loud. So I leaned back in the motel chair, the metal digging into my shoulder blades, and I stared at that line for a long time, wondering how deep this thing really went. Wondering if they were scared or just angry they didn't know where I was. And for the first time since I walked out that door, I felt something that wasn't sadness or grief or even anger. I felt curiosity, not about whether they missed me, because I already knew the answer to that, but about just how far they were willing to go to get their narrative back under control. They weren't searching for me. They were searching for the version of me that fit the story they liked to tell. And I was about to burn that story to the ground. There is a particular kind of calm that settles over you once you've accepted that nothing you ever say or do will change the people who insist on misunderstanding you, and it's not the kind of peace people write about in yoga magazines or self-help blogs. It's cold, calculated, and dangerously quiet. The kind that feels like standing in the middle of a frozen lake, knowing it might crack beneath you, but also knowing you'd rather go under on your own term than let someone else keep dragging you back to shore just to drown you all over again. By the 3rd week of my disappearance, I had shifted from avoidance to orchestration, no longer just watching from the sidelines, but actively pulling the strings of a slow, elegant revenge that I wasn't even sure I wanted at first. Not because I doubted whether they deserved it, but because I questioned whether I wanted to give them any more of my energy, even in the form of retribution. But then I remembered every moment I swallowed my own pain to keep the peace, every birthday I pretended not to care about, every smirk that passed between my mother and Emily like a private joke I'd never be invited to understand. And I decided that the most satisfying kind of revenge wasn't the loud, dramatic kind that ends in slamming doors or public confrontations. It was the kind where you expose someone so thoroughly they're forced to confront a version of themselves they've spent years denying. So I started with the photos, not the kind they kept in silver frames on the mantle, the curated memories that painted our family as picture perfect and glowing with fabricated affection, but the real ones, the ones that had been stuffed in shoeboxes and plastic bins in the basement, the ones where I was always slightly out of frame, slightly out of focus, the ones where my face never quite matched the moment, always a half step behind the smile. I scanned those pictures, digitally retouched nothing, and arranged them side by side with screenshots of social media posts that had excluded me over the years. Birthdays, holidays, vacations I was either never invited to or invited only at the last minute, with the clear expectation that I would find my own way there and back again, smiling through the awkwardness of not really belonging. I uploaded everything to a private website, password protected, hosted anonymously, with no identifying information beyond the raw truth of each image and caption. I called it the Ghost in the Family album. And I wasn't finished. Next came the videos. There's a peculiar power in home footage, in the way it captures not just what's being said, but what's being avoided, the glances, the interruptions, the dismissive tones that go unnoticed in real time, but become painfully obvious when replayed under the harsh light of hindsight. I found a clip from Christmas when I was maybe 22, already tired, already quietly checking out, sitting off to the side while Emily opened an expensive bracelet from my mother, who kept saying how perfect she was, how generous and thoughtful, while I sat with a $5 journal in my lap, the kind you find in a clearance bin with a ribbon that falls off the first time you open it. I looked straight at the camera in that video, just for a second, and the look in my eyes, it was like I already knew, even then, that none of it was going to get better. I edited that clip, just a few seconds, and spliced it with newer footage from Emily's social accounts. Her bragging about birthday gifts, her pouting over broken nails, her thanking our mother for being the best mom in the world. I didn't add narration, I didn't need to. The contrast was enough. The message was loud without a single word spoken. I sent the link to exactly 10 people, family, friends, former teachers, old neighbors, people who had always taken my mother at her word, who had never questioned the absence of one daughter in the parade of posts celebrating the other. I knew it would get passed around, and I didn't care how fast it spread, only that it did. And it did. By the end of that week. I started seeing the ripple effects, not directly, not through confrontation, but through subtle shifts in their social presence. My mother deleted several posts, including the one with the Gucci bag and the wine glass toast. Emily posted a vague story about misunderstandings and family drama, the kind that's meant to paint the poster as the victim without actually explaining anything. And then came the phone calls. At first, I ignored them, let them rot in voicemail limbo. But then curiosity took hold. I wanted to hear what their voices sounded like, not out of nostalgia or regret, but because I wondered whether guilt would change the way they spoke. The first voicemail was from Emily, her voice strained, trying too hard to sound casual, as she said things like, "Hey, just checking in, haven't heard from you in a bit, wanted to make sure you're okay, and I think maybe we all misread some things, you know?" As though what had happened between us could be chalked up to some mild misunderstanding, a little bump in the road, rather than a decades-long pattern of psychological exclusion and gaslighting dressed up as maternal love. Then came the second voicemail from my mother, and that one hit differently, not because it was emotional, but because it wasn't. Her tone was brittle, annoyed even, like she couldn't believe I had the audacity to take the narrative out of her hands. She said things like, "We're trying to fix this, and you're not being fair, and why are you dragging private family matters into the public eye?" And that's when I knew I'd hit the target. Because people like my mother don't care if you're hurting. They care if you make them look bad. Still, I didn't call back. I didn't answer. Instead, I planned the final phase. I reached out to a podcast host, someone I knew from my university days, who ran a small but loyal following around stories of family dysfunction, survivor narratives, and generational trauma. I pitched them the story anonymously. A woman erased by her own mother, whose silence became a weapon, I called it. And they ate it up. We recorded the episode with voice masking and pseudonyms, but the details were clear enough for anyone who knew us to recognize exactly who it was about. And when the episode aired, I didn't promote it. I didn't have to, because the people who needed to hear it already had their ears pressed to the door. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. I wasn't just disappearing. I was rewriting the ending. There comes a point, after the noise fades, after the frantic calls taper off into awkward silences, after the last image of your face flickers out of relevance from the minds of those who only ever saw you as a footnote in someone else's spotlight, where you begin to understand, not just intellectually, but deep in your bones, that the real power of walking away doesn't come from anger or even from pain, but from finally accepting that you were never the one who broke the bond in the first place. You only stopped pretending it was whole. By the fourth week, the dust had begun to settle, but it wasn't the calm after a storm. This was the eerie stillness of people trying to clean up a mess without admitting they made it. The podcast episode I'd anonymously contributed to had done more damage than I expected, not because I named names or spilled some dramatic secret, but because I hadn't needed to. The story, the voice, the tone, the subtle details I included were enough. And whether I'd intended it or not, it forced people who had comfortably looked the other way for years to ask themselves why someone like me, someone described for decades as independent and low maintenance and so quiet, would suddenly vanish and start pointing fingers. The podcast's reach wasn't massive, not by corporate standards, but it struck exactly where it needed to. I knew my mother's book club would hear it. I knew a few of her old friends from the PTA days, the ones who always called her Linda the Saint, would connect the dots. And I knew Emily, with her endless craving for online approval, would be the first to feel the cold wind of public suspicion when people started commenting less and asking more. I didn't watch them squirm for sport. I watched them because I wanted to see how far they would go to protect the version of themselves they'd spent years polishing and performing. And what I saw told me everything I already suspected. My mother didn't apologize. She tried to discredit me, passive-aggressively at first, through vague social posts and sympathetic comments about the danger of misinformation. Then more directly, when she sent me an email with a tone so carefully crafted, it might as well have been written by a PR team. All faux concern and buried accusations, all about how family deserves privacy, and how, whatever you're going through, we can help, if you just come back. But I wasn't coming back. And I certainly wasn't coming quietly. The final move wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclamation. I didn't want an apology. I didn't even want understanding. What I wanted was to be seen, on my terms, in my voice, not filtered through someone else's comfort or denial. So I did something bold, maybe even foolish, but absolutely necessary. I agreed to do a follow-up interview with the same podcast, but this time I did it live. Not in person, not face-to-face, but I lifted the voice masking, used my real name, and told the host I wasn't going to hide anymore. I spoke not to my family, but through them, past them, to every person out there who had ever been quietly erased by the people they called home, to anyone who had spent birthdays being told they were too old for presents, only to watch their siblings be showered in gifts for simply existing. I told the truth, not the grand sweeping truth that demands tears or applause, but the quiet kind that makes people uncomfortable because it's so ordinary. I told them how it felt to be the daughter who was always expected to understand, to forgive, to accommodate. I told them how the silence grew inside me until it became a scream no one could hear. And I told them why I left. Not to punish, not to shame, but to breathe for the first time without asking permission. And in the hours after the episode aired, something strange happened. I didn't receive angry calls or threats or guilt-drenched pleas to come home. Instead, my inbox began to fill with letters, not from people I knew, but from strangers who recognized themselves in the edges of my story. Women in their 40s and 50s, men who hadn't spoken to their siblings in years, people who had sat at family dinners feeling like guests at someone else's celebration. They weren't offering solutions, they were just saying, "I see you." And that, more than anything, told me I had done the right thing. But still, I knew my mother wouldn't let it end quietly, and I was right. 2 days later, a lawyer contacted me, not to sue, but to formally request that I refrain from discussing the family publicly again. My mother's attempt to scare me into silence. She still didn't understand that I had nothing left to lose. I wasn't after her reputation. I wasn't after her money. I didn't care about the damn handbags, or the Instagram filters, or the tidy little lies she whispered into the ears of her friends. I was after my own voice. And now that I had it, there was no putting it back in a box, so I sent one message in return. It wasn't to the lawyer, it wasn't public. It was a simple, handwritten letter I mailed to my childhood home, addressed to Linda. Written in blue ink on thick paper, no return address. It said, "You told me adults don't need presents, but I needed presents. And you never gave me that. So now I've given myself something better. My story, my freedom, my name, unfiltered. Consider it my final birthday gift." And that was it. I don't know if she opened it. I don't know if she read it and cried, or crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. I don't know if she finally understood, or if she curled even tighter into her cocoon of curated perfection. And honestly, I don't care. Because sometimes closure doesn't look like forgiveness or reconciliation or some tearful reunion in the rain. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. Sometimes it's the sound of your own footsteps, walking in the opposite direction and never looking back. And sometimes the only way to truly be seen is to disappear, loudly,